Well, here we have a work by Diego Rivera. This is one of two works on our private collection, the other one being a work titled Mandragora, which is kind of a tongue twister, but from 1939. And I have here two portraits, or two pictures, that show Diego Rivera working on the creation of this painting, and I'm going to pass them around, as well as another picture that's pretty interesting that has Diego Rivera working on this painting, but also our other work in the museum collection on the back. So it's a double shot there. So this is a very unique work. Diego Rivera is best known for working in very large-scale works. Also, his work tends to be very didactic and very straightforward. But nonetheless, even though this is a smaller scale work and a little bit of a mysterious work, it does reflect a lot of his central themes throughout his work. So we see an interest, and I will discuss this later on, an interest in Mesoamerican culture and art. Also the presence, quote unquote, of people who are important to him in his personal life, and also his political views and love for medicine. So we have somewhat of a non-traditional portrait. Usually we have portraits reflecting the sitter's face or full frontal figure. But here we have Diego Rivera chooses to focus on the sitter's hands. And I will touch upon this, which I think is very significant to the work later on. And in a way, I think it reflects, or at least I interpret it as reflecting an affinity towards workers' rights, which Diego Rivera had throughout his life. So first of all, I would like to go over the inscription that's written in a ribbon on the bottom. It's in Spanish, so I'll go ahead and read it in English for you guys. And it says, "These are the hands of Dr. Clarence Moore of Los Angeles, California. They trim the tree of life that is renewed and doesn't die. Diego Rivera painted them in 1940. So here, as we have Dr. Moore, at least his hands, trimming what is the dead part of the anthropomorphic tree of life, we have this type of cellular forms on the top instead of leaves coming out. We almost see them in the process of mitosis. So as he cuts this off, we're seeing new life being renewed, which directly corresponds to what the ribbon at the bottom says. Prominently in the center, we have what is the tree of life. And here we have it with reflecting the figure form as well. And having the tree of life in the center and very prominently reflects Diego Rivera's interest in Mesoamerican culture. The tree of life, well, let me backtrack a little bit. Diego Rivera was an avid collector of Mesoamerican art. He collected throughout his life pieces, and he even built a museum in the outskirts of Mexico City, or what were the outskirts then. Now it's part of the city because it keeps on growing. The museum houses over 50,000 works of all of his personal collection, which is pretty impressive, and it's also made of volcanic rock and in the shape of the pyramid. So it's very true to his interest, and he actually collaborated with Frank Lloyd Wright in the design of the building. The Tree of Life is a very important symbolic figure in Mesoamerican culture. Its depictions of Tree of Life date back over thousands of years, appearing in their art and also in sacred texts. It is part of their mythological construction of the genesis of the world, and it is present in civilizations such as the Aztec, the Mixtec, the Olmec, and the Maya. It represents the tree of life, the unity between the heavens, the earth, and the underworld, being also very important for Mesoamerican cultures. It's associated with deities and the calendar, and in several of the ceremonial sites that would plant 4 trees of life, each one corresponding to the north, south, east, and west. So the presence here, what I think Diego does, is he combines the tree of life and the implications of a Mesoamerican culture with modern medicine. So in a way, he's talking about it being able to be harmonized and not be mutually exclusive. As you know, in Mexican culture, there's still a lot of tradition that practices indigenous medicine. So in a way, he's combining them both here at the central figure and theme of the mural. The Tree of Life also today are still being created. They're part of the folk art traditions of the town of Metepec. And these trees of life are interesting in the way that they no longer reflect what is the genesis of life through a Mesoamerican perspective, but more of a Catholic perspective. So they have Adam and Eve represented in them, and this is part of the colonial legacy in Mexico, where the Tree of Life was changed to indoctrinate Mexican people into Catholicism. So it's still prevalent, it's still practiced. There's trees of life that are maybe this big to a couple or several feet high, ranging for 2 weeks to make it to several years. And Diego and Frida did travel to this town, and they did collect some of the trees of life from there. This is sources from the artisans there. Not that I met them personally, but through my research. So in a way, it reflects this, like I said, Diego's interest in pre-Columbian art, Diego's interest in unifying what is modernity to Mexico's pre-colonial past, and also in what I was saying also that is this painting talks about the presence of important people in Diego's life. And although it's not explicitly, there are several components here that recall the work of Frida Kahlo, which is was Diego's wife. The presence of an anthropomorphic, the female figure, the flora and fauna, the blood, the ribbon, those are stylistically also reminiscent of her work, but it represents her, to me, in a different way, which is a little bit more subtle, and that is in this area here, where we have Dr. Moore cutting off the dead part of the tree, corresponds to Frida, who had her leg amputated right from the knee down on the right side. This happened in 1953, so obviously he couldn't have known, but perhaps she already had complications with her leg. I mean, she did have health complications throughout her life. But during the time when this painting was created, Frida and Kahlo were having a little bit of a turbulent time in their life. They divorced in 1939 when this work was commissioned, only to be remarried in 1940 when this work was finished. So in a way, maybe it's talking about divorce, but it also foreshadows what would be some of her health complications in the future. And the third theme that I think is present here is, like I said, Diego Rivera's political views. And I see this in his choice of focusing on Dr. Moore's hands and not his features or anything that would identify him. In a way, he is portrayed as a worker that works with his hands, like many laborers or workers from Mexico, which tended to be central figures in his work. So in a way, I think he talks about a kind of universal worker, really based on his hands being the source of his work and of his livelihood. So those are some of the themes that I see present. It is a work that is very different from most of Diego Rivera's, what we traditionally think about when we're talking about his work. But the themes that are present both in his work and personal life are here in a very unique way. So is there any questions that I would like to entertain? Mm-hmm.
I was struck by the surgery is brutal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the work is a bit gory, I think, which makes it very attractive as well.
Is Frida Kahlo?
I mean, I think you always run a risk when you try to interpret a piece of work through the artist's personal life. It's a risky kind of endeavor, but I would say that for Diego and Rivera, this is valid because they represented each other a lot in each other's work. So they were present throughout their work, and so I think we can kind of guess or take a guess that, says maybe he was thinking more of their divorce, perhaps, as renewing, severing off a kind of a limb or a rib and renewing life. But I think,
life goes on.
Yeah, but in a more interesting way, I think it's the issue that it does correspond to the leg, to her right leg that was actually amputated to gangrene. I think that's kind of, although it was later on. Mm-hmm. Yes?
I just want to mention for those who may not know that we have a mural that's on view in the museum as well, that this is one of the works that inspired it.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's definitely worth seeing.
Yeah, and you can see it in a much larger scale, which corresponds to Diego's traditional size and format.
And we have an artist, in fact, from Mexico City who's going to be, who's interpreted this work in a sort of number of variations on this theme. And that show's going to open at the end of the month in our new gallery.
End of the month already? Oh, no.
End of next month, I should
Yeah.
say. End of May.
Yeah. So yeah, Diego is somewhat present in the museum in different manifestations, I think. Let me see if I had anything else that I wanted to share. Yeah, well, just actually to touch upon, I was mentioning that Diego was a very politicized artist. Like many of his contemporaries, he was a member of the Communist Party, and this is what I'm talking about, his affinity to workers' rights. So he was a member of the Communist Party. He did portray workers and day laborers as his central figures. And that's why I dare to say that his focus on the hand as manual work does recall that kind of ongoing thread, I guess, and ideology in his work. But what makes his work unique is that it's not as didactic as most of his work, and it's not as straightforward, which I think is really interesting.
Yes, so now, what was his relationship with Dr. Moore? I assume it was a doctor, or?
Yeah, so Dr. Moore was a very affluent physician from Los Angeles. It was actually his wife who commissioned the work, and his wife was married to, Klaus Spreckels, I believe, who is a local, well, his family owned the Hotel del Coronado. They also were the local philanthropists. They built the organ pavilion that we have right outside. So it was her who commissioned the work, and he actually went down to Mexico City to do the sitting when he was being painted. And you can see that from those pictures that it looks, there. So he, Diego chooses not to represent him as a very affluent and well-educated man, but instead just focuses on the hands and makes it a bit more anonymous, even though his name is on the bottom. So I think that was their...
I wonder if Dr. Moore liked the taste of her.
I would think so. I mean, I think it's kind of a mutual, kind of pat on the back.
Surgeons, and their hands are not like that. They're fine, and they're not like that. So I just wondered if he liked the piece.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the size of the hands is also, to me, reminiscent of the kind of size of a lot of like pre-Columbian sculpture. They usually tend to be very large heads, large features, and it shows hands that are kind of more of a working hand, right, than a manicured, white-collar hand.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. So I would say that, yeah, they enjoy each other.
Dr. Moore must have been close to Diego Rivera, or not have gone to Mexico City. I mean, there had to have been some connection, whether he liked it or not. It's like,
I'm not sure how they, I mean, Diego Rivera did travel to California several times to do commissioned work. He did work in the United States that was very controversial when he actually was very explicit in his political views, having some of his mural, or one of his mural commissioned by the Rockefellers being destroyed because he had a portrait of Lenin that he refused to remove. It was destroyed, so that was before this. So this is definitely a much more subtle work than that. He did travel, he has a mural in San Francisco at the San Francisco City College that also has a tree of life represented in one of the panels, and is Frida Kahlo, Diego Rivera, and then Ms. Goddard, which was Charles Chaplin's wife at the time. So he's kind of, it's titled Pan American Unity. So in a way, the tree of life and having him connect these both women is kind of representative of that unity. So it is a reoccurring theme, the tree of life, in his work and also in Frida's. So yeah, so maybe they were part of the same social circle, Yeah, he had very wealthy patrons, Diego Rivera. In Mexico, mostly the government. In the United States, mostly industrialists, which is a bit ironic cases, but yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.